My name is Sabine Höhler, and also a big welcome from my side to you all. I'm looking forward to working with you all these next following 2 days, and I hope that we will learn a lot from each other, but also have a lot of fun. I'm going to give a very brief historical perspective presentation on this topic, and I don't know who of you were here on Saturday when we introduced the seminar. I'm not going to repeat all that, but I would like to start out still with this picture again, the Sustainability Needs Markets campaign from the Swiss think tank from 2010. That says, and I don't know why this picture is so dark actually, it looks very dark to me. It's much brighter, what I see here on my screen. If nature went public, it would be the most valuable stock market flotation of all times. So to think about this value of nature, if you honestly transform that to monetary value, it would be so costly that well, not many people would be able to afford it. That is, I think, what these empty cards here want to show us. That sustainability needs markets seems to be a widespread, common belief nowadays to realize sustainable development, that the market system is the best and most appropriate exchange system that we have at hand, and to integrate and to internalize external cost of nature consumption and nature degradation into market systems seems to be the most common way of dealing with global environmental change nowadays. So understanding nature as valuable in the economic sense can be very useful and is already applied in many environmental protection schemes, paying for using nature as a source and also as a sink. So the idea is to reflect the cost and the benefits of natural resource extraction, of consumption, of waste production, of recycling. The accounting tools have become the common instrument, perhaps, to balance human-nature relationships. But there's also, and I said that on Saturday as well, there's a very problematic aspect to pricing, placing a price tag on nature, seen as resource, and that is that it entails a very instrumental view on nature as a source and a sink. And some of that was in Natalie's talk this morning about viewing trees only in that source or sink perspective, that it's there not for itself and for its own sake, but for us somehow. And we see it in this very unilinear way as a tree that basically is there for human well-being. And then the other question, of course, is the question of distribution, of access and exploitation. Like once a resource is defined and has become interested as such, who can exploit it? And how can we use assessment tools to balance these kind of operations? Are they actually the adequate tools to understand and control resource use and overuse in the first place? Or will they perhaps worsen the problems of capitalizing on nature? Are they the means of capitalizing on nature? That is, I think, what is at stake here, and describes some of the paradoxes of accounting systems in place. So I just have a very brief historical example, and some of you who worked on environmental accounting, and also what did I hear just now in the introduction round on valuing trees and perhaps some forest history, they will know that the quantification tools, the rationalization of forests in the German states from the Enlightenment period onwards, where the idea of sustainability was first formulated, and then I have also some concluding remarks then on ecology and economy. So I thought this forestry example, even though it's quite well known, connects very well to what Natalie was telling us this morning about this single tree and the kind of connections that it is in. So this idea of trust in numbers, that is, I think, what is at the heart of these kind of exercises of rationalizing nature into resources, and the interesting, what I find interesting is here, if we think about Anthropocene, and these kind of scientific quantification systems, this empire of quantification, this quantitative revolution that started out 300 years ago with Enlightenment science, basically. So then you could say, well, that didn't have the impact on nature and the reformation of the natural systems as perhaps the 20th century interventions had of science and technology. But I do claim that with these kind of improvement movements and the quantification measurement for the account of, for the sake of nature and also for state economies, did have massive impact actually on how the surface of the earth was perceived. So this is the very well-known quote from Sir William Thomson, Lord Kelvin, physicist: "To measure is to know," and that is at the heart of this approach that these approaches that we are discussing today. And here's the somewhat longer quote, and I'm not going to read it, but it's what is interesting here is the idea that if you want to know about something in physics or in other natural sciences, perhaps also in the social sciences, you have to be able to express it in numbers, to know something about it. When you cannot measure it, then you cannot know it, and then your knowledge will always be insufficient. That is what Lord Kelvin here says. That's a late 19th century quote, but it does also hold for much of the 18th century, actually, leading up to the Enlightenment period. So if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. That's the idea, and that is, I think, still underlying the approaches that we have taken also to the environment and to ecology, nature, and ecology as a sort of also partly quantitative science. If you think about forestry, this is really very dark, and I'm sorry about that. This is a map from a textbook from 1788, and it shows an imaginary forest patch that is partitioned in 84 sections. So this is not even at the beginning of state forestry, but it's late state forestry, I would say, but still the cameralist age, when it was about the forming states trying to create commonwealth for present and future generations, and to increase the volume of wealth within the boundaries of the states. And here the idea was that if you had a forest, you would partition it, parcel it in these equally spaced, equally sized patches, and have with 84 sections a rotation clearance period of 84 years. So each year one of these patches would be cleared, and then it would regrow, and the next year you would take the next patch. And by that kind of rational system, the idea was one could keep the forest stand so that the resource would not diminish, but would remain stable. And that, of course, is not the beginning of this kind of state forest management approach, but that goes back to Hans Carl von Carlowitz, the German, well, what was he? How can you say that? Political economist, perhaps, well, early 1713, with a book on Silvicultura Economica. And he is said to be the founder of the sustainability idea, which is in German Nachhaltigkeit. And this from the beginning combined conservative goals of conserving forest stand and utilitarian goals, cultivating nature, or here forest, for the productive and the provident state. And what is interesting here, I find, is that from the origins of this notion of provident natural resource use, the idea of sustainability was sustained yield. So it's not only an ecological sense of sustainability avant la lettre in a way, or ecology avant la lettre, because there was no ecology then, but there was an idea of how quick forest regrows and how long you have to wait until you clear a forest patch, because otherwise the resource would be used all up. And so to make most efficient use of this forest was the idea that went into the notion of sustainability as sustained yield, as a yield that would be sustained over a long time. And that then in turn required these kind of measures and quantification systems to come in place of normalizing these trees, of counting, of then aggregating, standardizing, and state administering these trees, which in turn went along with a reformation of property rights. And because these forests had been long used by other parts of the population, so they were commons. And this kind of rational system imposed led to an eviction of local populations and their use of the forest for their livelihood. So this legibility, to use here James Scott terminology of making land legible for the state, that meant to basically exclude other users or other use of that land, or forest land, and to be able to manage these estates. And that, I think, is something that still is part of what is left out of most accounting systems. In these systems, it was not included that there would be, as Natalie was saying, a connection between these trees. They were all single trees that could be counted, but what they did for each other and sort of the ecosystems around it was not part of the equation. Neither was part of the equation the social use of these forests and the social systems around it, and that they for centuries had been integrated in. So this kind of accounting scheme, the scientific rationalization, was imposed in a way that then also did really change the landscape. And here is another German example that has to be read in the upper hand corner, right-hand corner. You start out with what the forest was when was that? That was sometime, I cannot read it here, but 1800s. The upper picture to the right. And then the first 100 years of management is the lower picture to the right, where you can see that these patches have been reformed so that they can, at some point, develop into an ideal parcel allotment scheme. That is the one. The ideal scheme is on the upper left. So that is the forest that the foresters, the state foresters, the scientific foresters imagined would be the ideal state, and these different colors are different different timber growing here, so that one could then have a rotation period clear when which of the patches would be cleared. So this, even though it might never have really materialized, you can see how these systems are not just ideas, but they have transformed these landscapes in quite profound ways. This table is just to show you how these accounting systems of science and economy are so close that you can actually not really separate them. Scientific accounting and economic accounting use the same ways of balancing their books, these taxonomies or the taxing systems. They have a long history that has brought these together, so that it's really difficult to separate scientific counting from economic accounting. This is here where you can read on the left, it's the periods, the time periods of felling, and so this really reaches, I mean, these are hundreds of years basically that this spreads here. There's a 200-year plan, and then on the right you have the different timber and the different envisioned monetary outcomes of this kind of natural resource. So this just to show you how this was developed, even though I have very little image material here. So to conclude, what I wanted to address is really this metrical revolution that started in the Enlightenment, where you have scientific and economic accounting practices merging with the idea that one could describe or represent the perfect order both of nature and of the emerging states, then in the 19th century, the nation states. Scientific forestry rationalized and also economized forests as a resource, basically for the benefit of the state through timber production. That capital, and Johan will talk about natural capital later on, capital then became a figure that was addressing both natural and human production systems. And still, when Karlowitz formulated Nachhaltigkeit and sustainability, it was, from today's perspective, I think, a very conservative view of what the natural capital was, because harvested were the interests in the most efficient way. That is what sustainability then meant. We could, if we had more time, discuss how in the late 20th century, in the later 20th century, actually the financial system also sort of decoupled from the material capital system, so that we don't have these kind of conservative views on natural capital any longer, but we have actually now in investment perspectives on natural capital that is about profiting. It's not about harvesting sustainably. So that is something to also reconsider and consider, I think, when we do our exercises here. What that actually which kind of changes that has brought when we speak about natural capital and what it does for us, so to speak. And I leave it at that.